Congonhas Airport lies at the center of Brazil's most populous city.
When pilots begin landing at Congonhas, they're more worried than when operating at any other national airport.
At its heart is 35L, a runway built on a hilltop and surrounded by urban sprawl. To make matters worse, it's just over 6,000 feet long, which is short for large jets. This makes 35L one of the most treacherous runways in the world.
As you approach the runway, your adrenaline is really pumping. For us pilots, it's like landing on an aircraft carrier.
As Flight 3054 nears Sao Paulo, the crew gets an update.
3054, 35L is the active runway.
Runway 35L has reopened. But Stefanini has an additional challenge to landing.
Remember, we only have one reverse, sir.
Yes. Only the left.
The right thrust reverser, one of two on the Airbus, isn't working. That reduces the plane's stopping power. The devices are designed to slow the aircraft by reversing the direction of the engine's forward thrust.
Thrust reversers, they act like brakes when you land the aircraft. You deploy them only after the aircraft is on the ground.
10-3054, 35L, clear to land.
The runway is wet and it's slippery. The wind is 330 at 8 knots.
On final approach, the captain decides to take over from the autopilot.
Land green, manual flight.
The concern was that after touching down, the pilots needed to be sure that they would be able to stop their plane before the end of the runway.
100, 100.
1 duck now. Okay.
20. Retard.
Middle.
The plane is not slowing.
Reverse number 1 only.
And it's hurtling dangerously fast towards the end of the runway.
Decelerate.
It can't! Look at this. Look at this.
Turn! Turn!
Flight 3054 has slammed into a TAM Airlines office building and a gas station beside it. All 187 passengers and crew are dead. A dozen people on the ground are also killed. It's the worst aviation accident in South American history. Lieutenant Colonel Fernando Camargo is an accident investigator with CENIPA, Brazil's aviation safety agency.
The black boxes will not last long in the heat!
His first concern is to recover the plane's black boxes and send them to experts in Washington, D.C. for scrutiny. While they wait for results, investigators focus on runway 35L, looking for clues.
We knew that we would have to run a complete investigation on the runway.
They soon make an important discovery.
It's still wet!
Rainwater is pooling, creating puddles on the tarmac, something that shouldn't happen.
When this water gets in contact with the landing gear, the tires, it can generate what we call hydroplaning. And this is a problem because a pilot will have little or no control of his aircraft.
How can water be pooling on one of the busiest runways in Brazil? To find out, the team studies files from the government agency that runs Congonhas Airport. They learned that runway 35L was resurfaced 1 month before the accident.
Em 2007,
In 2007, the runway at Congonhas underwent repairs. It had been offering a very low level of traction. There were many reports of skids.
But the resurfacing work on the busiest runway at Congonhas lacked a critical safety feature.
The runway is wet and it's slippery.
Proving to be done at a later date. No wonder it was wet. It was wet.
Channels cut into the tarmac carry away rainwater. Without them, rain collects in puddles. But even with a wet runway and only one operating thrust reverser, the A320 should have been able to stop. To figure out why it didn't, investigators examined the plane's maintenance records. They learned that the right thrust reverser was deactivated because it was jamming, but the aircraft was then flown without incident for 4 consecutive days.
This plane landed on the same runway that day with the same problems, had only one thrust reverser. No issues whatsoever.
Not only had the plane landed repeatedly with one thrust reverser, it even touched down safely on runway 35L. So why did this landing go so wrong? The data from the badly burned flight recorders has been retrieved by experts.
Here we go.
Investigators hope it will finally explain what led to the disaster.
The speed is fine.
100.
Came down fine.
The data confirms the brakes were working.
Brakes were engaged.
And the plane didn't skid or slide. But it also reveals a puzzling fact. On landing, the plane's 2 engines seem to be working against each other.
1 and 2. Engine 1.
The left engine was in reverse to help slow the aircraft down. But the right engine, the one with a disabled thrust reverser,
it's powering up.
Was accelerating to climb power.
Decelerate.
It can't.
Decelerate.
So engine 2 was thrusting when it should have been idling. That would explain the veer off to the left, right?
The question is, why would this experienced crew touch down with one engine at climb power? They would have known it could doom the flight and everyone on board. Why Flight 3054's engines were working against each other is now the team's main focus.
We could establish roughly 2 main lines of investigation. 1, mechanical failure, and the other one, pilot error.
The flight data and physical evidence shows the engines were functioning. Investigators turned their attention to the pilots. They start with the captain's landing prior to the one at Congonhas.
First, how did they land in Porto Alegre?
They learned that during the previous landing in Porto Alegre, Captain Stefanini pulled back both thrust levers. Exactly the right procedure for landing with only one reverser.
And now, both levers to reverse.
That a captain knew the procedure, he performed the correct procedure hours before in the previous landing.
So what did he do differently in Sao Paulo?
Okay.
Okay, now Congonhas.
Left lever to idle, then reverse.
20. Retard. Retard.
Instead of throttling back both levers, he only brought the left engine to idle, leaving the right one at full power. Then, once the aircraft touched down, he activated the left thrust reverser to slow the plane, but kept the right engine at climb power.
That is quite different. I don't get it.
How could a guy that knew the aircraft, that knew the correct procedure, that executed a correct procedure, how could it do something different?
You said you... Doesn't make sense.
We could really use your help on this.
Investigators enlist the help of another pilot.
Okay.
He shares an outdated procedure for landing an A320 with a single thrust reverser that pilots find useful on wet, short runways. It brings the plane to a quicker stop.
The former procedure was taking both levers to idle, and then just the lever corresponding to the engine with the reverser operating normally, that would be taken to reverse position.
But Captain Stefanini never brought the right engine to idle.
Did they get it wrong?
Investigators learn of previous accidents caused by pilots mishandling thrust levers on landing.
That old procedure led pilots to error.
To reduce the risk of pilots making that mistake, Airbus modified the procedure. The team now speculates that Captain Stefanini, hoping to bring the A320 to a quicker stop on a rain-slicked 35L, opted for the old procedure, but in doing so made a critical error.
It is completely understandable that he had tried a former procedure and under such a pressure made a mistake.
To test their theory, investigators recreate the final moments of the flight in a simulator.
Okay, engine 1 to idle, engine 2 stays at climb.
Right away, Lieutenant Vanessa Diaz notices how difficult it is to distinguish the position of the thrust levers inside a dark cockpit.
Retard.
Engine 1 to reverse, don't touch number 2. Brakes.
In the simulator, we were able to program in every known factor. The chronology of events, the wet surface, position of the levers. We also went off the runway and had an accident in the simulator.
The team now understands why TAM Airlines Flight 3054 ended in tragedy. To increase the plane's stopping power on a short, slick runway, Captain Stefanini tried an old procedure for landing with a disabled thrust reverser.
Land green, manual flight.
But he was out of practice, and combined with the stress of touching down in rainy weather, the captain became so unnerved, he botched the simple procedure.
It's possible that tension might block a crucial motor response. It can affect the pilot's ability to react.
There was no alarm to warn the crew that one engine was revving forward while the other was in reverse. First Officer Lima tried to figure out what was going wrong.
Decelerate! Decelerate!
But in a dark cockpit, overwhelmed by a landing going badly, he didn't catch the faulty thrust lever settings either.
Look at this.
A runway with a dangerous reputation so worried pilots they made a deadly mistake that cost 199 lives. In the wake of the accident, the runways at Congonhas have been grooved for runoff and are regularly inspected. New rules are in place dictating wet weather landing procedures.